Welcome to Guilty Pleasure Stories channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Hello. The house was alive with the gentle hum of Christmas Eve. Soft golden lights from the tree reflected off the frost-laden windows, casting an ethereal glow over the living room. The scent of freshly baked cookies mingled with a sharp tang of pine, a comforting reminder of years past. I sat by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls. When my son Arthur walked in at 20, he was no longer the little boy who used to dart around the tree, tearing open presents with wild abandon. Yet there was still something boyish in his smile as he placed a mug of steaming cocoa in front of me. "Made it just the way you like it," he said, his deep voice warm and familiar. I smiled, wrapping my hands around the mug, savoring its heat. "It's perfect, just like this night," I replied, glancing at the tree, adorned with ornaments we'd collected over the years. Arthur sat beside me on the couch, close enough that I could feel the heat of his presence. We began to reminisce, sharing stories of Christ Mass past the time he'd accidentally toppled the tree while reaching for a hidden gift. The year we both got the flu and spent the day bundled under blankets, watching old movies. Each memory felt like a thread in the tapestry of our shared life. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different, charged with something unspoken. I looked at him, noticing how he had grown into himself. The boy I raised had become a man, confident and thoughtful, yet the bond we shared still felt unique, almost sacred. "Mom," he said suddenly, his tone serious. "I know this sounds odd, but this might be my favorite Christmas." I tilted my head, curious. "Why this one? We haven't even opened presents yet." "It's not the presents," he said, his voice soft. "It's just being here with you, talking like this. I don't know, it feels special." His words caught me off guard, tugging at something deep within me. "Arthur, every Christmas with you has been special. You've always been the best gift I could ask for." We sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly in the background. I reached out and placed a hand on his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'm proud of you, Arthur, for everything." His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, it felt as though time stood still. The connection between us was undeniable, a blend of love, gratitude, and something neither of us could quite name. The clock chimed midnight, breaking the spell. I rose, brushing invisible dust from my sweater. "Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy." Arthur stood as well, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Mum. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Arthur." As I climbed the stairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this Christmas truly was different. There was a depth to our connection that hadn't been there before, a recognition of the unique bond we shared. Whatever the future held, I knew this Christmas Eve would remain etched in my heart forever. The snowfall outside the frosted windows was heavier, now thick flakes blanketing the street in a pristine silence. It was Christmas Eve and the world seemed hushed, as if holding its breath for the day ahead. Inside the house, glowed with warmth and light, the fireplace crackling gently, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Arthur sat on the couch beside me, a shared blanket draped across our laps as the glow of the Christmas tree flickered nearby. It had been years since we'd spent Christmas Eve like this. For most of his teenage years, Arthur had been too preoccupied with friends or his growing independence to sit by my side, as he did when he was younger. Yet tonight something was different. His choice to be here, just the of us, made the evening feel special in a way I hadn't anticipated. "I miss this," I said softly, sipping my cocoa. "Having you home. Just the of us, it reminds me of when you were little." Arthur chuckled, his gaze flicking to the tree back when I believed in Santa. "Those were good times, they were," I agreed, my voice carrying a wistful note. "But I'm enjoying this too. You've grown into such a thoughtful man, watching you become who you are now." I paused, searching for the words. "It's been the greatest privilege of my life." He glanced at me then, something flickering in his Ava eyes. "You've always been my anchor, Mom. Even when I was away at college or when I didn't call as much as I should have, I always thought of you." His words touched something deep within me, a warmth spreading through my ***T. I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead, an instinctive gesture from when he was younger. This time he didn't pull away, didn't wrinkle his nose in mock protest. Instead, his gaze softened and he leaned slightly into my touch. The fire crackled between us, filling the quiet moment. You know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find someone who understands me the way you do. The question caught me off guard and I hesitated, searching his face. Arthur, you'll find that person when the time is right, but you'll always have me. Always. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. No, just. I don't think anyone else could not. In the same way, there was a weight to his words that I didn't want to examine too closely. I tried to push past it, offering a light smile. You'd be surprised life has a way of surprising you, Arthur. But as I spoke, his hand brushed against mine beneath the blanket. The touch was fleeting but deliberate, lingering just long enough to send a spark of something unnameable through me. I told myself it was nothing, just the closeness of the moment. The intimacy of a quiet Christmas Eve shared between the people who meant everything to each other. Still, I couldn't shake the way it made me feel, how my heart seemed to quicken in a way that felt unfamiliar and yet impossibly natural. As the night deepened, Arthur and I moved from the couch to the kitchen, where we began preparing for the next day's feast. The act of cooking together had always been one of our shared traditions, a holdover from when he was a boy who loved sneaking bites of cookie dough when he thought I wasn't looking. Here I said, handing him the whisk for the eggnog. You always get the consistency just right. He took it, our fingers brushing in the exchange. This time I couldn't ignore the way my pulse quickened. Arthur seemed to notice it too. His gaze met mine, searching as if waiting for me to say something. Madam, he said softly, his voice laden with a weight I didn't fully understand. Can I tell you something I've been thinking about? I nodded, my heart thudding against my ribcage course. Arthur, you can always tell me anything. For a moment he hesitated, his eyes flicking to the counter before returning to mine. I don't know where I'd be without you. You're not just my mom, you're everything. My breath caught his words, pulling at something deep within me. The room suddenly felt too warm, the air charged with an intensity one didn't know how to name. Arthur, I began, my voice trembling slightly. You don't have to say that. You've always been everything to me too. You're my son, I know. He interrupted, stepping closer, but it's more than that. I feel closer to you than anyone I've ever known, and I think I always will. His confession left me speechless. The space between us felt heavy with unspoken emotion, the lines of our relationship suddenly blurring in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell him he was imagining things, but the look in his eyes, earnest, vulnerable, kept me rooted in place. Arthur, I whispered, unsure of what to say. This is too much, he asked, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. Mom, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's just being here tonight with you. It feels different. I exhaled, trying to steady myself. No, Arthur, you didn't make me uncomfortable, but it's complicated. He nodded, his expression conflicted. No. He hesitated, then took a step back. I'm sorry, forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget the moment hung between us, like the fragile ornaments on the tree, delicate and threatening to shatter at the slightest misstep. Let's just get through Christmas, I said. Finally, my voice soft but firm. We'll figure out the rest later. He nodded again, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he returned to whisking the eggnog. The tension remained unspoken, but undeniable as the quiet hum of Christmas Eve wrapped around us like the falling snow. The quiet of Christmas morning came with its usual serenity. But this year the stillness between Arthur and me wasn't one of peace. It was heavy, charged with the weight of something we couldn't name aloud, but both felt deeply. The soft glow of the lights on the Christmas tree filtered through the living room where Arthur and I sat together. A space too close, yet not close enough. The night before had left both of us teetering on the edge of something unspoken, something we knew we shouldn't even approach, yet it was impossible to ignore the shift between us, the pull that seemed to grow stronger with every shared look, every fleeting touch. Sleep well? I asked, breaking the silence as I handed him a steaming mug of coffee. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine in a way that made my breath catch. Not really, he admitted, his voice low. I couldn't stop thinking. I hesitated, unsure if I should ask what had been on his mind about what I ventured cautiously. He glanced at the mug in his hands, his thumb tracing the rim. Last night? The words hung in the air like an unwrapped gift, their meaning unmistakable. My heart raced as I tried to steady myself, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Arthur, last night was just emotions running high. Christmas has a way of making everything feel more intense. He set the mug down, leaning forward, his gaze locking onto mine. Mom, you know it's more than that. It's not just Christmas, and it's not just last night. I've been feeling this way for a long time. I froze his confession, pulling me into a current. I wasn't sure how to escape. Then stop, we can't. This isn't something we can talk about. Why not? He asked, his voice steady, his tone filled with a kind of certainty I wasn't ready to face. Why do we have to keep pretending? This isn't real. I know you feel it too. His words struck like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile facade I had clung to. He wasn't wrong as much as I wanted to deny it. I couldn't. I felt it too. The closeness, the connection that went beyond the lines of what we were supposed to be, but admitting it was dangerous a step too far. Arthur. I began, my voice trembling. Love you, but this isn't right. We can't cross that line. He leaned back slightly, his expression pained. I'm not asking us to do anything. Mom. I need you to be honest with me. Do you feel it too? Please just tell me. The intensity of his gaze made it impossible to look away, and the truth I had been trying so desperately to suppress rose to the surface. Arthur, of course. I feel close to you, I said, carefully choosing my words. You're my son. That's what this is, a bond between a mother and her child, nothing more. But even as I spoke, the words felt hollow, the denial weak against the storm of emotions that had been building between us. Arthur must have sensed it too, because he didn't press further. Instead, he sighed, picking up his coffee again, his shoulders slumping under the weight of my response. I don't want to make things harder for you, he said quietly. I needed you to know. His vulnerability tugged at me, pulling me closer. Despite my every instinct to push away, I reached out my hand, resting on his arm. Arthur, you're the most important person in my life, but we have to be careful. We can't let this ruin what we have. He nodded, though his expression remained conflicted. I'll try for you. The day passed in a haze of family traditions that felt increasingly hollow. The usual joy of Christmas, the laughter, the presents, the shared meals was overshadowed by the tension that simmered between Arthur and me. Every glance, every touch, no matter how innocent, felt like a spark threatening to ignite something neither of us could control. That evening, after the dishes were cleared and the house had quieted, Arthur and I found ourselves alone once more in the glow of the Christmas tree. I had thought about retreating to my room, putting distance between us to calm the storm inside me, but something kept me there. Do you remember when we used to build showmen on Christmas Eve? He asked suddenly, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. I smiled at the memory course. You'd always insist on giving them the most ridiculous hats. He laughed, the sound warm and familiar. I think I just wanted them to stand out, to be different. His words carried an unintended weight, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, stretching between us like an unspoken question. I wish things could be simpler, he said. Finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I wish I didn't feel this way, but I can't help it. Arthur. I began, my voice faltering. You don't have to say this. I do, he said, turning to face me fully. I need you to understand how much you mean to me. How much I stop. I interrupted, my voice trembling. Please don't say it. But the words were already there, unspoken yet undeniable. The connection between us, the emotions we had tried so hard to ignore, filled the space between us, leaving no room for pre-and-sees. He reached for my hand, his touch, sending a jolt through me. Mom. I love you more than I should. Tears pricked at my eyes as I pulled my hand away, the weight of his confession crashing down on me. Arthur, this isn't something we can act on. It's not something we can even think about. You're my son. That's all we can be. His face fell, the pain in his eyes, cutting through me like a knife. I know, he said softly, but I can't pretend anymore. Neither could I, but for the sake of everything we had built, I knew I had to. The bond between us, as deep and unshakable as it was, had to remain unspoken. A secret we carried together in silence. I sat on the couch, my fingers nervously gripping the edge of the blanket, draped over my lap. Arthur stood a few feet away, his back to me as he stared at the fire. The orange light bathed his profile in warmth, highlighting the tension in his shoulders. I could tell he was working up the courage to say something, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Finally, he turned to face me, his Ava eyes locking onto mine. Mom. He began, his voice soft but steady. I need to say this. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to stop him, to tell him not to go any further, but I couldn't find the words. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. I don't know how to explain this, he continued, his voice trembling slightly, but there's something between us, something I can't ignore anymore. And I don't think you can either, Arthur. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Please don't. But he didn't stop. He dropped to his knees in front of me, his hands resting lightly on my knees. Just listen, he pleaded. I know this isn't what we're supposed to feel. I know it's wrong, but I can't pretend anymore. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I looked down at him, his vulnerability, his raw honesty. It was too much. I wanted to tell him he was mistaken, that what he felt was just confusion. But deep down I knew I couldn't, 'cause I felt it too. Arthur, I said again, this time more firmly, you're my son. This isn't something we can act on. It isn't something we can even talk about. He flinched at my words, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he moved closer, wrapping his arms around my waist and burying his face against my stomach. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice muffled. I don't mean to hurt you. I can't help how I feel. For a moment I froze, unsure of what to do. His embrace was warm, comforting in a way that made my heart ache. Slowly, hesitantly, I brought my hands to his shoulders, as if trying to push him away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, my fingers curled into the fabric of his sweater, holding him there. We can't, I whispered, my voice breaking. Arthur, this will ruin everything I know, he said, his grip tightening around me. But I can't let it go. Not when I feel this strongly. You're everything to me, Mom. His words shattered the fragile wall I'd built around my heart, and I felt tears spill down my cheeks. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this was just a phase, but the truth lodged itself in my throat. I couldn't deny the connection between us, the bond that had grown stronger and more complex over the years. Arthur, I said, my voice trembling, we have to stop. We have to move past this. How, he asked, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. How do we move past something? The strong. Please tell me, because I don't know how. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was stare down at him, my own emotions warring within me. The love I felt for him was undeniable, but it was a love that had to remain within the boundaries of what was right. Anything else would destroy us. He rested his head against my lap again, his arms still wrapped tightly around me. I don't want to lose you, he said softly. I can't lose you. You won't, I said, running my fingers through his hair instinctively, the way I used to when he was a boy. I'm not going anywhere, Arthur, but we can't. We can't let this become more than it is. He nodded against me, his body trembling slightly. I'll try, he whispered, but I don't know if I can. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, the only sound, the crackling of the fire and the faint hum of the Christmas tree lights. I didn't know how to move forward from this moment, how to return to the way things had been before. All I knew was that the bond between us had grown too strong to ignore, and it would take everything. We had to keep it from consuming. By. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories.